water loss and guard cell shrinkage, thus closure small. I mean, that's all they say about it. They don't talk about osmotic potential. They don't talk about difference in water potential inside and outside the membrane and how water moves. You know more about that stuff now than is given in this paper. It's interesting. But anyway, read this at your leisure. You have trouble sleeping sometimes. Print this out. Couple other things. Here's a yucca plant, just to show yucca also has stomata sunken into. In this case, they're not crypts, but they're like little valleys in the length of the leaf, going out the length of this leaf. And here's a cross section of one of these valleys. You can see the guard cells here and here, sunken down below the level of the epidermis, which also increases the distance over which water vapor has to diffuse out of the leaf and CO2 diffusing in. So very water use efficient, but not very productive.
So would these adaptions be correlated with a different form of photosynthesis as well? Like, we talked about, we talked about oleander and they're in crypts. Is that a way to, perform C4 and then still get away with being in a dry environment so that they don't have to adapt CAM, or?
I think oleander's a C3, I think. I don't know, does anybody know? And yucca, is yucca a CAM or is it a C3?
I don't know, it's a pretty desiderated plant.
Yeah, it is. It's just
Thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Good question. I don't know. So the extreme case that of that those photosynthetic changes is CAM, is crassulacean acid metabolite, right? Where you keep your stomach closed during the day and open them up at night.
Right.
That's very efficient in your use of water, because at night, when the stomach are open, you don't tend to lose as much water.
But not very productive.
But not very productive, because you have to do all your photosynthesis at night when there's no light, and you have to already have stored the precursors that you're gonna need during the daytime that you're gonna use that night. And so it's weird. And then there are plants that can switch between C3 and CAM, like the Mesembryanthemum that I talked about, the ice plant, where when things are dry, it switches to CAM. But if it has plenty of water, it'll be a regular C3 plant. So, I mean, there's that weirdness too. That's a good question. I don't know. It probably has something to do with it, or at least correlated with that. So. And yucca does grow in Nebraska, right? Yeah, it grows well. Yeah. Not so much around here, but do you see it in the sandhills? Okay. Anyway. Okay, so here's my last thing, is this. Let me talk about these things for a while. Okay, here's something weird, right? Here's something weird. This is sort of a history lesson, in a way. I'm old enough to know something. For a long time, if you're interested in photosynthesis and plant physiology, if you're interested in stomatal conductance and what effect various environmental conditions have on the process of photosynthesis, it's hard to separate an influence on photosynthesis directly versus an influence on stomatal conductance, which after all is controlling the rate of photosynthesis. We can come back to this. Total leaf conductance for CO2 times CA minus CI, right? Okay? If we impose a treatment on a plant that reduces the rate of photosynthesis, let's say we have a plant in high light and we switch to low light. That has an effect on the rate of photosynthesis. The rate of photosynthesis will decrease. But we also know that the stomata respond to light. And they open in high light and they close in low light. Does light have an effect on photosynthesis independent of its effect on stomatal conductance? Right? So that historically has been a challenge to separate those effects, whether it be light, CO2 concentration, water stress. Does water stress affect the process of photosynthesis directly, or is the effect of water stress on reducing photosynthesis totally explained by the stomata closed with water stress? So this is a difficult, it's a tough nut to crack, as to say, right? Or has been. But one way that physiologists have looked at it is by making ACI curves, right? So if you plot, what's the ACI curve? If you plot the rate of net CO2 assimilation, A, photosynthesis, if you plot A as a function of CI, you get some relationship. And typically that relationship tends to look like something like this, where CI, let's say, this is some typical value, say, 260, whatever, 260 parts per million. If we have, say, 400 parts per million. Okay, anyway. This relationship between A and CI is what it is. This is the rate of photosynthesis as a function of the concentration of CO2 inside the leaf. So if we have a treatment, let's say we have a treatment like high light, and that's how we develop this curve. Now, if we change that light intensity to a low light, what happens? Well, with the ACI curve, what happens is this goes like this, and this goes like this, and here is low light. You get a different relationship. Don't worry about this. Dotted line. We could spend a few weeks talking about all the nuances. But anyway, my point is, here, light intensity has altered this ACI relationship, which is the argument for light has an effect on the process of photosynthesis itself, independent of its effect on the stomata. Because here we're plotting CI. We're already past the stomata, right? We're looking at photosynthesis and CI. Stomata determines CI, but they don't have anything to do with this relationship. We're already past their level of influence when we're looking at ACI curve. So the fact that light alters this ACI curve is an argument for light has an effect directly on the process of photosynthesis, independent of its effect on the stomata. And you know that, of course, because, as I keep saying, light reactions of photosynthesis, the Z scheme, DPH, photosynthesis 1, photosynthesis 2, and it takes light to do this. You know that the Z scheme depends on light. This is happening in the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast. Light has a direct effect on photosynthesis, independent of its effect on stomata conductance. And that's illustrated by this difference in ACI curve. Okay, so another experiment you could do is grow plants at high nitrogen concentration versus low nitrogen concentration. You also will see a difference in ACI curves then. Why? Because nitrogen has an effect on photosynthesis directly, independent of any effect it has on the stomata. And how do you know? Well, it's obvious. Most of the nitrogen in the leaf is in the form of rubisco, the enzyme that catalyzes the carboxylation of RUBP, the first step in the Calvin cycle. So it's not surprising that nitrogen also is shown to have an effect on photosynthesis, despite what it does to stomata. Okay, so what about water content? So when people were interested in this and arguing about it, now there's not much argument anymore, but let's say high water supply and water stress. When people made ACI curves and looked at the influence of water on ACI curves, they got similar results. That this relationship was in fact altered by water stress. And the argument was water stress must have an action on photosynthesis itself. The Z scheme, the Calvin cycle, suprasynthesis, whatever, the process of photosynthesis, independent of how water stress closes the stomata. Because you see a change in the ACI curve. Turns out that's not true. Turns out water affects, water stress affects photosynthesis. The effects of water stress on photosynthesis can be totally explained by the effects of water stress on stomatal conductance. There's no separate influence on the process of photosynthesis itself that water stress causes. Well, then why do you see this change in ACI curve? Well, puzzling until people started to realize that or started to remember one of the things that I explained earlier, that the stomata are independent of each other. And the guard cells react to their conditions, their environment, right around where they are. They don't care what the other one's doing down the leaf somewhere. They're responding to their own conditions. And it's been shown in fact for a while, that stomata can close in patches. In some plants, given some conditions, you'll have a patch of the leaf with open stomata and another patch with closed stomata. One early way people used to do it is to expose a leaf to some treatment and then after waiting a while, cut the leaf off and use iodine to see where starch had accumulated. You know, iodine and starch makes starch, iodine turns starch black. And so if you do that, you can see a black patch here on the leaf and a lighter patch and another black patch and another lighter patch. These black patches must have been producing starch during this treatment. So this stomatal patchiness had been known for a while. And it was later discovered that ABA can cause patchiness in stomatal conductance. Bear with me. You can see I don't have this part organized very well, because sometimes we don't even get this far. Talking about this stuff. Okay, I have to go back to the last one, but instead of doing that, remember CI is not something that's directly measured, right? the way CI, and I went into this a couple of times ago, right, last week sometime. CI is a function of, well, we can rearrange this, right, to give us divided by total conductance, CO2, minus CA, and put a minus sign on it, something like this, right? But, and then there was another one that had the transpiration rate. That's the equation I was looking for, but I don't remember it. And suffice it to say that CI is calculated based on some equation that we have that involves the photosynthetic rate, the ambient CO2, the total leaf conductance, and it turns out the transpiration rate. And remember, I was drawing this chamber, and how do you know that that equation is right in that whole argument? Well, this whole argument depends on the fact, on the assumption that this leaf conductance is uniform over the whole leaf, that the stomata aren't closing in patches. If the stomata are closing in patches, that goes right out the window, and there is no uniform CI over the whole leaf. This CI is determined by assuming homogeneity in stomatal conductance, at least over the patch of leaf in your cuvette. And with water stress, since AVA mediates that water stress response, if it closes the leaf in the stomata in patches, you can calculate the wrong CI and come up with what you think is an effect on ACI curve. But in reality, it's not wrong. It's not right. It's your calculation. And it took several years, well, decade, before this was fully appreciated. So now, the consensus is that water stress affects photosynthesis by closing stomata, and not through any direct effect on the photosynthetic process itself. This patchiness let me just close with this. This patchiness, you tend to see stomata close in patches when leaves are heterobaric versus homobaric. What does that mean? If you look at a cross-section of a leaf, look at a cross-section of leaves. So let's say here's stomatal pores here, and here's some more over here. We'll have a vascular bundle with xylem and phloem here in the middle, surrounded by bundle sheath cells maybe, and here's the lower. Could have stomata there too, it doesn't matter. Some leaves from the vascular bundles have tightly packed cells that extend from the bundle to the roots. Tightly packed means no airspace between these cells. So if you have that and you have another vascular bundle over here with these so-called bundle sheath extensions that block air movement, you can have a CI in this part of the leaf that's quite different from the CI in this part of the leaf. You have different internal CO2 concentrations here and here, because there's no mixing of those gases inside the leaf because of the leaf anatomy, these bundle sheath extensions. This type of anatomy is called heterobaric. Right? Different pressure. Other plants don't have these bundle sheath extensions and have uniform CIs through the whole inside of the space. That's called homobaric. When you have heterobaric leaves, you tend to have more stomatal patchiness. Because after all, remember, these guard cells are responding to this internal CO2 concentration. It's this inner surface of the guard cell that's permeable to CO2. That's where they're sensing, that's the CO2 concentration they're sensing. And so for heterobaric leaves, you can have different CIs. And if you're computing a CI based on the assumption that all the stomata are behaving the same, you'll get an incorrect CI. And you'll convince yourself that water stress has an effect on photosynthesis itself, which it does not. All right, clear as mud? Okay. In grasses, you tend to get these different portions of the leaf walled off in long strips because of the way the veins go along the length of the leaf like that. So you can have a strip of stomata behaving one way and an adjacent strip behaving different. But there you go. There you go. A bit of a history lesson. Influence of water stress on photosynthesis is totally explained by its influence on stomata. Okay? That's that. Thursday I'll start in with scaling up. Now that we know our little things about stomata, how can we scale that up to whole canopy? In the meantime, here's a home